In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can create a dashboard like this to track sales. I'm going to use slicers, timelines, and pivot tables to make a dashboard that's unique and customizable that you can easily update over time. A really important first step in creating your dashboard is to make sure that your data is clean, ready to use, and it's accurate. Because otherwise, you're going to spend all that time creating a dashboard, jumping into it, creating charts, only to find out potentially later on that you need to fix things or your data is wrong or it's missing information. And nobody wants to do that. So it's always helpful just to have at least a quick glance at your data, make sure everything looks correct, the headers are set up properly, and see if there's any fields that need adjustment. So here I've got order dates, order IDs, customer information, product information, prices, units sold, and transaction type. So having a quick glance at this, I don't have any issues with my data set. One thing you can easily do to check for any errors is if you use the F5 shortcut, select special, and then under formulas, uncheck everything except for errors. If I hit OK, that's what you want to see. You want it to tell you that there's no cells were found that contain errors. And so that means that your data doesn't have any errors on here. So that's good to go. Another thing you may want to do is parse out some fields or create some new ones. For example, I've got customer location and we've got city and state. Ideally, we'd have city in one column and state in another. So I can parse that out in Excel really easily. So I'm going to insert a few columns here and I'm going to call one city and one state. And if you've got Office 365, one thing you can use is the text before function. And what this allows you to do is select your text. And for the delimiter, I'm just going to put a comma here. Now I've got that. I've parsed out the city. Easy enough. And for the state, I'm going to do the same thing. This time I'm going to use text after. In this case, selecting the same field, but my delimiter is going to have a comma and a space after it, because you'll notice after the comma, I've got that space. So I don't want to include that space in my state field. So I'm going to close that out. And now I've got the state. So now with that data ready to go, what I can do is copy these and paste them as values. So now I've got rid of those formulas, and now I can do away with this field since I no longer need it. Another thing that I'm going to do is add a field for the total sales. Right now I've got product and units sold. I'm going to have one for total sales. So I'm just going to take the product price, multiply by units sold, and copy that down. And also format this in $signs, just so it's easier to read. The last thing I'm going to do before going in and creating my dashboard is converting this into a table, and that makes it easier when you're referencing back to it what your data set is. So if I go to insert table, automatically selects my data, select that my table has headers, and then I'm going to rename my table from table 1 and just call it table data, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. The point is it'll be easy to refer back to it later on by referring to a named range. And the benefit of setting up your data this way is if you add something to the very bottom, if you add data later on, it'll automatically expand to include that information. You won't have to adjust your range. This is really an underrated feature of tables, just because that can make it a whole lot easier when you're referencing that. Your dashboard gets new information and you don't do a refresh, or you don't expand your data to make sure that it's including everything, then your dashboard could be out of date, having complete data, and so on. So that's a really important step before you move on to creating your dashboards. One thing that makes it easier is first converting your data into a table. One thing that you might find helpful when creating your charts for your dashboard is to create a separate tab just for pivot tables. And so that's what I do just to organize my data. So I'm going to call it PT for pivot table. And what I'm going to do is create multiple pivot tables from my data set. And since I've got a named range here, table data, that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to use my existing worksheet location here, paste it into there. And now I can decide, what sort of things I want to analyze. So for example, I may want to have my total sales broken out by category. So I can see a breakdown of these different categories to see which one sold the most items and how they did compared to one another. What I also want to do is add the total units sold as well, so I can compare both units sold and total sales and plot that on a chart. And now what I'm going to do is copy this and create another pivot table, since I'm referencing the same data, except this time, let's say I want sales broken down by month. So I'm going to grab the order date, drop it in the rows, and there you can see Excel's automatically grouped it based on quarters and months as well. So if I right click on here, there's an option to group the data. And so it's automatically selected months, quarters, and years, but I'm going to uncheck quarters just because I don't want that. Obviously, you can go a bit more detailed if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it at months and years just because that's a logical way, I think, to break it down and an easy way to track it. If we had days, that'd be way too many values going into our chart, so it wouldn't be practical or easy to read that way. Now, another way we can break down the data, sales data, we had breakdown by product categories. Let's now do one by the state. So instead of product category, let's use state, and I could also break it down to city if I want to, but for now I'm just going to leave it as state and just do total sales. So I've got sales by state here. I'm also going to create a chart for breakdown of in-person versus online sales, because that's an interesting breakdown as well. So instead of state, we've got transaction type. So we've got in-person versus online. So we've got a few charts in here that, or a few tables in here that can be useful for creating charts. Now, the one thing, if you're doing this, if you're creating pivot tables, is to be aware of the spacing, because one problem that you may run into is if you refresh your data and your pivot tables end up overlapping, you'll get an error message. So I've structured my pivot tables in a way that they're not going to overlap. So if I added product categories, for example, it's going to expand vertically, but not horizontally. It's not going to overlap. Now, if I put the dates right next to here, or this pivot table right underneath, then there could be a potential problem, right? Because it's going to expand downward, so it could overlap with this one if I put it there. So if you're going to use multiple pivot tables and you're refreshing your data, that's just one thing you need to be aware of, just to make sure that you budget for that amount of space to make sure that there's no overlap between, so that there's not a potential for overlap in the future, more importantly, because even though you structure it correctly today, as you add data to it, especially when you're using dates, that pivot table can expand and then overlap into another pivot table, in which case you're going to get an error. So just one thing to keep in mind, if you're creating multiple pivot tables, make sure you've got it spaced out in a logical way where there's not going to be any issues with overlap. Now, one other thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to put it in a pivot table, but I'm going to calculate my total sales across everything. And so for this, I'm just going to use a sum function and say grab the total sales here. And let's say I've got a target of 1.5 million. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a chart to show how close I am to my target. And so I'm going to have my actual and remaining. So my actual is 1.387 and the remaining to my goal is $112,000. So let's just say, you have a budget that you want to reach, and I'm going to show how close we are to reaching that. So now that our tables and our data is set up, the next step is to start creating the charts. When creating a dashboard, I like to use a separate tab entirely just for my dashboard. Just so I've got one tab for my dashboard, one for my pivot tables, and one for my data. Just to make it a bit more clean and organized, easy to follow. So now once I've got my pivot table set up, I can start now creating these charts. So I'm going to start with my product category sales. So I'm going to go to insert, select the chart, and for this I can just use I'm going to use a combination chart. So if I want to select all the charts, I'm going to open this up and go under combo because I want to show both the sales and the units sold. So this is where having a secondary axis can be helpful to show both the dollar sales and the unit sales. So the dollar sales I'm going to have as just a regular clustered column chart. The unit sales, I could have as a line chart, but I'm going to use this one, put this one on a secondary axis. This way it'll be easier to see, because if I don't have that axis, you can see that it's going to look flat, like it's nothing, because obviously the dollars are going to be much larger than the number of units sold. So a secondary axis can be really helpful for that purpose, to plot two things at once. Now obviously you could create two separate charts for each, but since they're related items, products sold and the dollar sales for these product types, it makes sense to put them on one chart. So now I'm going to right click, cut and paste this onto my dashboard tab. And this is a pivot chart, and that's why we've got these selections on here to show that, we can toggle these as we would a pivot table. But on a dashboard, that doesn't look terribly nice. So I'm going to go on the pivot chart analyze section and uncheck the field buttons. I'm going to get rid of that. And what I'm also going to do is move this legend down. And to do that, if I go to the design tab, add chart element, there's an option for legend to put it at the bottom. And one thing that I find also really helpful is to format these numbers properly. So format the axis, there's a section for number. We can put this in a currency format, no decimal places. And one other adjustment I like to make is shrink the white space. And a way to do that is if I format this data series, these column charts, to make that gap width just 50%. And that makes a lot thicker and easier to see, or less white space in my chart. And another thing is obviously we want to add a title so we know what we're looking at here above the chart. So I'm going to say sales by category. Now, when you're designing your dashboard, there's a lot of different preset designs you can go for in Excel, so it makes it easy for you if you want to switch up the look and feel of it. You can also change the colors if there's a certain pattern you prefer. Right, so there's a lot of different ways that you can customize this easily. Now you can also change this yourself. So if I just click on this and let's say I don't want that orange line, let's say I want a lighter shade of blue perhaps, we could have it that way where we've got sales by category and we've got units sold and total sales. So next I'm going to go to my pivot table showing sales by month and year. So here, when you're looking at a time series, it can be effective to use a line chart here just because it's a lot easier to show that than in column charts. And actually what you may want to consider instead of a line chart is I'm going to change this chart type and look at an area chart where it's filled in. Bit of a different effect. It's similar to a line chart, but another way to show the data. So I'm going to click OK. Again, I'm going to use Control X and Control V to paste this over here to my dashboard tab. Get rid of those field buttons. I don't need this legend. This is kind of pointless. I know I'm looking at total sales, so I'm going to remove that and stretch this out. And in this case, I've already got a blue chart here, so I may want to change this up a little bit, use a different color here. So for the fill color, we could do something like let's say a green one because we're talking about dollars here, and maybe change the transparency, make it a bit more transparent so we can have that nice effect of having those lines in the background. And if we go to the design tab, we can add more lines. So for example, we've got an option for grid lines, major vertical grid lines, just to see that breakdown of what month aligns to what. And then if I select my chart as well, Right now, there's not really an outline, but I can use a solid outline here. So let's say a dark green to outline the lighter green. So it has that effect of having a bit of an outline there. And here we can call this sales by month. And so time series can be helpful in that sense because it's easy to see that progression over time. Now, one thing to make this dashboard for everything blend in a little bit easy is I'm going to go to the View tab and uncheck grid lines just so I don't see this. So it's a flat background, flat white background. Everything will be easy to blend in. And another thing that we always like to do with these charts is get rid of these borders. So if I select them, there's an option to use no line for the border. Same thing for this one. And now you can see it blends in a bit more seamlessly into that. Again, I'll modify this axis just so we've got the number format being a currency, no decimal places. Always want to try to save space wherever you can, especially on a dashboard where you've got a lot of visuals going on and a lot of things that you want to make room for. So you don't want a chart that's terribly larger than it needs to be. So moving along to the next one, I'm going to go to the pivot table tab now, and this time I'm going to create a chart for sales by state. So here I'm going to go to insert, and just to change things up a little bit, I'm going to use a bar chart going across just so we don't have the same chart going over and over again. So I'm going to hit OK. Control X, Control V to paste it over here. And I'm going to get rid of those buttons, get rid of the legend as well. And just to make it look a little bit different, I'm going to get rid of these labels down here. And instead, I'm going to right click on this bar chart and add data labels and add them to the end here. So I just want to adjust how they're formatted. Format them so we've got the number showing as a currency with no decimal places. And so now, we have no need for the labels because we see what the amount is. What I'm also going to do is format this series to make the gap width 50% again. And also change the header here. So we've got sales by state. And it's probably worth it to also change the colors as well, just so they're not the same thing. Maybe something a bit of orange. There we go. So we've got sales by state. And let's also get rid of the border as well, just so it blends in. So now we've got a bit of a different look. We've got sales by state, category, months. We've got a lot of different breakdowns. So back to the pivot table tab. And now I'm going to do a breakdown between in-person and online sales. And so because here we've just got 2 items, this is where it might make sense to use a pie chart. So let's do a 3D pie chart here. And again, cut and paste to move it over here and move it a bit higher up here. And while I'm at it, get rid of the border. And what you could do actually, if you wanted to blend into charts a bit more seamlessly, you could get rid of the background fill color. If I do this, you'll notice now it overlaps with the other chart. So you don't have to worry about a potential overlap, because as long as they're not really affecting one another, you could have a bit of an overlap without that white border making it look like it's overlapping and sticking out a bit more than you'd like it to. I'm going to get rid of the buttons as well and get rid of this legend, because here I'm going to add data labels again. So adding data labels, and I'm going to format them to say, okay, let's get the category name and let's show the percentage rather than the value. All right, so we have 51% in person, online 49%. And if I go to the home tab, format these colors so it's stand out. So if you want to change the labels, you can do that right on the home tab once you've selected them. And we don't really need a title for that, just because it's pretty self-explanatory. We're talking about transactions online versus in person, but of course you could add category if you wanted to. So in this case, I'm not going to. Let's change the colors a bit. So perhaps blue versus light blue, whatever the case may be. If you prefer to just change the manual, you could do that as well. So if I select this entire slice and let's say do a solid fill color, perhaps a light gray for online, or maybe a bit of a darker gray because I've got that white font. There we go. So a bit more of a contrast, because if you're selecting the colors from Excel's built-in options, there's at times not a whole lot of variety. So you'll want to be able to have that flexibility to change it to however you want. Okay. And now we may also want to do another pie chart to show the sales by category. So we've got the total sales here, but it might be helpful to also have the sales broken down by category as well, in terms of a pie chart. So I'm gonna get rid of units sold here, and instead I'm gonna use this pivot table to say, let's convert this into a pie chart as well. Paste this over to the dashboard. And here, just to see how our product mix looks. So if you want to pick actually before I do that, let's get rid of the field buttons as well. Get rid of this, get rid of our title. There's an option to use different built-in formats. As you can see, you may like the built-in designs that are available right within Excel. So for example, this might be a decent looking chart. We've got the breakdown, we've got what they are. We just want to format the data labels to say, okay, let's add the percentage as well here. And let's get rid of that. Oops. Want to make sure, get rid of the fill. I'm selecting the actual chart. There we go. So now we've got a bit of a breakdown as far as what our product mix looks like, where our revenue is coming from. And so we've got two pie charts, one for the online in person, one for breakdown by category. So I'll organize this in a little bit here, but basically the key thing is we want to make sure we've got our charts set up properly, showing what we want them to show. And then once we've got that, then it comes down to really organizing our dashboard to make it look how I want it to display the data. So one other chart that I'm going to use now is a donut chart to show how close we are to hitting our goal in terms of revenue. So we've got total sales of 1.387 million versus our target 1.5. So let's plot this out on a donut chart. So to do that, I'm going to select my value here, my actual and my remaining. And I'm going to go to Insert, Chart. And if I go under Pie Chart, we've got a section for Donut Chart. And so the reason I've structured it with actual and remaining is because that's how this donut chart works. It takes the first piece and then the remaining piece. So I can't just add the two values in there. I want them to add up to that total 1.5. So I know how close I am to that 1.5. So this big piece, that's how much I've got so far. This little piece, what's left. So again, I don't need the label for actual versus remaining. And so instead, I'm going to structure it that way. I'm also going to get rid of this label here. Again, no fill, no border. And I can cut and paste this over to my main dashboard tab here. And so the idea is I'm going to put this right in the middle. And let's say I'm going to move these pie charts, one on each side. So that the idea being I'm going to have my total sales shown in here. We've got pie charts on either side and format this accordingly. So for the progress, for what I've got so far, I'm going to make this, select this bigger slice. So I want to make sure we've got the right color here. So let's use a dark green. And then this small slice, the orange one, let's do a light gray just to show, okay, that part has not been achieved yet. So we're still a little bit short. Now, with this donut chart, we can change the hole size here. This size of the donut hole, really small, really large. Now, I prefer to keep it a little bit bigger just because it allows us to sneak in some data into there. What I'm going to do is insert some rows above here because I want to leave some space for some slicers later on. And So what I'm going to do here is we can add some text boxes to put within this donut chart. So I'm going to go to Insert. There's a text box in here. So I'm just going to create a bit of an outline right here. And so I can link this. So I got my text box selected. I'm going to, in the formula bar, link to my value here for my total sales, 1387. So I'm just going to grab this one for my actual and make it bold. Oops, little running out of a bit of room there, but make sure it's bold. And so we've got our, whoops. So the thing with these, you just want to make sure you're grabbing the right items here. So we've got 1387 for my total sales. And let's say we want to track what that actual percentage is. So let's say 1387 out of 1.5. So it's about 93%. So again, let's create another text box here. Put it underneath here. And again, so instead of typing in this text box, I'm going to click in the formula bar and link to that value, 93%. And now I can make sure I've got it selected here. And put it in the center. Perhaps not bold, but let's say right underneath it. So we've got our total sales here. So it's just a matter of now just positioning it where we want it. So we've got our total sales. And I can also add yet another text box right above it for that title. So that way I don't necessarily have to use the chart title. I can create my own. So let's say total sales. So basically I just want to have a quick highlight of what our total sales are for everything up until now. And now we can move our chart here. So it's already copied within this chart. So as we move it, all these text boxes will move along with it. So in this case, I'm gonna get rid of the bolding because I've already bolded the total sales. So I don't want to lose its effect. There we go. So total sales in here. So if you drag it, we've got the label saved within it. But just because I've added the text box right within the chart, it's saving them so I don't have to move one by one. So as you can see, we've got that in there. So let's potentially expand this. And we've got our breakdown. So we've got total sales. We've got our breakdown here by product mix. And so we can now start to structure our dashboard how we want it to look. And make sure that we're balancing all our different charts. We don't want to spread it out too thin. Want to make sure that we can see a bit of everything within just a few lines. I don't like to want to leave gaps or anything like that. So it can be helpful to make sure we position everything properly. Shrink down ones where, you know, we may not need all that space. So let's say potentially put these pie charts off to the side, let's say maybe, and structure them as so we can balance out the room. So at this point, really a lot of it comes down to how you want your chart to look and how you want it to be displayed, how your dashboard should show, and what the most important items are. So let's say we've got our total sales here, and we can still manipulate this around to make sure it's aligned properly. Whoops. So if you ever make a mistake, you just do Control Z to go backwards in case something's not aligned. But once you've got it in there, we've got our charts, we've got our tables. And so now I've made room for some slicers in here. So what we can do now is go into our pivot tables, and I'm going to insert some slicers. Just any one of these pivot tables, I'm going to go to Insert, slicers over here. So I'm going to select city, state, product category, transaction type, and let's also select months. So now grab all these slicers and move them onto my main dashboard page. So we can have these selections on here. So now it's a lot easier to make these changes, and we can shrink these down if we know there's only going to be a few selections for some items. We can do that here. And so see, in this case, it might make sense to move our dashboard a little bit over just to make the most of our space and, minimize that white space just to make it a bit more compact so we can squeeze everything in. So we've got sales by category, sales by month, and try to align it as best we can. So moving it around can sometimes take the longest time just to try to make sure we've got everything taken up, just as much space as we need it to. So this can sometimes be the more time-consuming part of the process once we've got everything in here. But arguably, probably sales by transactions probably less important than the actual sales mix. So to make this one larger, and let's perhaps move this one up over here. So we've got sales mix over here. Emphasize that one a bit more than our online sales. And shrink those down over here, let's say. So just to make it a little bit more compact, but at the same time we could fix it in. And one thing we could always do is change the font size of these to shrink them down if we need to, just to fit everything in there. So size 10, there we go. Now we have a balance of online versus in person. Got our sales mix in there, product mix. So we've got a whole lot of data in here showing what our breakdown is in terms of sales. Now, for these slicers, we can again use a different color coding if we want to. So there's a lot of prefixes in here, or templates, I should say. So if we want to make them green for months, whatever the case may be, but they can all be the same or different colors depending on what you want. But the key thing that you're going to want to do when you're making these selections to your dashboard is, if I right click report connections, just check off all the pivot tables that have been created. And this is important because when you do this, basically any change you make to these slicers is going to affect all those pivot tables. And that's important because you want to make sure all these charts also update as well. Because if everything isn't linked, then one selection isn't going to affect the other. Or not going to affect all of them. So report connections, making sure all these pivot tables are selected. Now what's going to happen is if, let's say, I select Arizona for my state, then all these charts are now updating. So we've got sales by state. It's only going to show Arizona. We see the monthly sales only for Arizona. Sales category, sales only by Arizona. Now, the one thing that's not changing is this total sales. This one was not linked to a pivot table. Remember, this is the cumulative of everything. And that's really by design. If I wanted to, I could link this to a pivot table to say, okay, I just want the total sales to update based on the pivot tables. But if you want some of your values not to link, not to update to these pivot tables, then either you could unlink it or do as I've done here, where this value is linked to a specific cell. So I've linked it to here. So this is taking that total sales from the data. So the key is this is always going to be the grand total, but these other charts will update. So if I select California, everything updates. This one stays the same. If I want to make multiple selections, I can hold down the control key and select multiple states. When I release it, now my charts update. So it makes it really dynamic. We can slice it multiple ways by state, by product category. We've got a lot of flexibility in terms of seeing that breakdown and how everything looks. So it's using slicers can be really helpful in that sense. Another thing you can do, I do have months here, but what you may prefer to do actually is also use a timeline instead. So I've selected months here, but the problem with using a slicer for months is it doesn't differentiate what year we're looking at here, right? So that's the danger with using a slicer for months. So instead, what you may want to do is if I go back to my pivot table tab, and if I've got sales by month here, I can go to insert a timeline for my order date. And again, let's cut and paste this back into my dashboard and put this right above, right around there. And by doing so, we'll have to readjust dashboard a little bit. So let's say insert a few more rows here just to space this out. It'll automatically expand my chart, but I can always shrink it back down. So now we've got our sales. Let's maybe squeeze this one in here. And, you know, always want to adapt your dashboard to however you want it to look. A lot of flexibility, obviously, in your presentation. The key thing is you just want to make it easy to read and easy to follow to align everything. And so we've got a good snapshot of our value. So now with the timeline, again, I'm going to select report connections and make sure we select all of our pivot tables, because again, we don't want just one pivot table updating. And by doing it this way, we can see our months that we've got. So in this case, we've got all the months in here. We also can include years as well. So we've got 2023, 2024, right? Or we can have it by quarters or by months. But as you can see now, we've got 2023 and 2024. So if I just want to look at certain intervals, I could stretch that out, right? I can look at just a month, a few months. Really cool thing about these timelines is it makes it a lot easier to see, because as you saw with the slicers, if I just select January, I don't know if I'm looking at January 2024 or 2023, and it's actually going to be combining it just because it's looking at the month. So with a timeline, it's a lot more clear what you're looking at and what you're analyzing, because the danger is you don't know what your dashboard's doing if you don't have the slicer set up properly. But as you can see, there's a lot of different ways you can set up your dashboard. What I recommend is first going through your data, combing through it, making sure that it's structured in a way where it's clean, you've got no errors, you've got your fields set up the way that you want, converting them all into pivot tables, the charts that you want to make, and then moving all that stuff onto a separate dashboard where you can track all your sales data. You can see what how you're doing based on different metrics. And if you always want to remove all of your slicers and just show everything, you can just clear off these selections by clearing the filters, and now you've got a snapshot of absolutely everything. So with the donut chart, we've got it linked to the total sales. We can use it as a way to measure how close we are to a goal. And these other pivot charts are linked back to our pivot table. So as we add more data, because our data tab is structured in a table, even as we add more information into here, all these charts, this dashboard will automatically update. All we have to do is do a refresh. So if you go to the data tab, hit refresh all, it'll pull in the latest data based on that. So all the pivot tables will update and all the charts will update. So that's how you can create a sales dashboard in Excel using pivot tables, using slicers, using a wide variety of charts and colors to help it stand out. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot. If you did, please leave a like and make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.